How's it going, everyone? I'm Peter McVeigh. I'm going to be doing a series of online Pro Tools sessions and Logic sessions on how to get started from the very, very basics right up. So, we'll start with Pro Tools today. We're going to open a session at the very bottom. It's going to be just very basic today. Open a session and discuss what the separate elements are that you need to configure just to get yourself up and running and ready to record. So, whenever you open Pro Tools, straight away there's a dashboard. You need to name your session, which is at the top there. So let's call this Peter Test. Local storage is all I'm going to focus on at the minute. You can do online collaborations in Pro Tools and things and save it there, but we're just going to look at local storage. The file type, which is the audio format that you're recording into, .wav is perfect. Don't touch it. It's BWF. The AIFF is also another lossless version of audio, but .wav is perfect, or wave, depending who you are. The sample rate on mine is locked at 44.1. It's only locked because I have so many pieces of audio equipment running at the minute while I'm testing a new audio device. I would usually record at 48K. We'll discuss why later. But at the minute, you can go between 44.1 and 48K. 44.1 is standard for CDs and things like that, and digital audio online, but 48K is standard for visuals, things like cinema, movie, TV, film, those type of things. If you want to get your audio on those shows, it's probably better to constantly record at 48K and then downsize to 44.1 for CDs. The bit depth is 24-bit, just leave it alone, that'll do. You can't put it higher and you can't put it lower, but 24 is pretty standard. And the I/O settings we don't need to touch. The I/O settings are basically your ins and your outs and how your session is set up. By saying the last used, that just means the last time that you opened a session, use those same ones. We haven't used Pro Tools before, maybe at the minute, so we're just creating something new. The location, you can prompt for location, so every time that you save a new name, it'll ask you where do you want to save it to. So that's useful if you record at different hard drives and things for different sessions. If you're a producer, if you work with different bands, or sometimes if it's just your own stuff, the location, my users folder, Peter McVeigh folder, documents, and then create. So Peter Test, when I click create, that creates a session. There are two windows that pop up, an edit window and a mix window. But before that, let's go see where the folder has been created. So if I go down to Finder and I go over to my documents, now there is a Peter Test folder. And in that, that's where my Pro Tools session is. If ever I wanted to share this session, I don't just move this Pro Tools file. I need to share the whole folder. So if I wanted to upload it to Dropbox and share it with someone so they could play on it too, I would share this whole folder, and that's in my documents folder where I've saved it to. So let's have a look inside the folder. Audio files, that's where your audio files are going to be saved within the session. When you bounce out files, they'll appear in each of the folders of the session. So this is called Peter Test. If I bounced out, and we'll talk about what that is, they'll appear in there. But you can decide where you want that to go anyway. Clip group, we don't need to worry about. The session file backup. If ever your Pro Tools crashes, your backup sessions are in here. So it'll be the last version before the crash. They also give you time. We'll have a look at that and I'll show you how it works. And these two last bits, video files that are associated if you were working on video for audio for film and things, and the wave cache, we don't need to worry about it. Okay? So we're in Pro Tools. If you want to cycle between the two windows that exist, so I've expanded both windows. If I have one screen, or if you have one screen, it's sort of good to get into the practice of expanding both these windows and pressing Command equals on a Mac and Control equals on Windows to cycle between them. So that's the mix window, edit window. I know a lot of people that don't even use the mix window. I personally do, but that's just my own personal preference. There's no right or wrong in this. It's just do what works for you. So whenever you have this open and maximized, the first thing we need to do is decide what our audio interface is and is it connected to Pro Tools. So the way we do that is we go up to Setup, we go to Playback Engine, and we look. As I was telling you before, I have the Dante Virtual Sound Card that I'm testing out. There is a Focusrite Thunderbolt interface that I would use. The Ecamm Live Audio is my streaming app that I'm using at the minute. Then there's my Rodecaster Pro, which is another audio interface. There's Samsung TV, an LED cinema display, which is the Apple display, then all the input options from the computer itself built in, and Pro Tools Aggregate, which we'll talk about at another point. So then there's a HW, the buffer size. This is basically to do with latency. That's how we'll approach it, and that's what we'll talk about at the minute. Latency is a delay while producing the sound that goes into the computer. So if you're singing, that there's sort of a delay in your ears, you can hear yourself back with a bit of a delay, or guitar playing. That makes it really hard to be able to record music because you need to be able to play in time. The lower buffer size that you can get to, the less latency there will be. The higher, the more. So if you're playing at 64 samples, you're not going to hear a latency. You'll be able to play along with that, and it'll not be out of time. You could probably get away with up to 128, maybe even 256. Some people can play. You might need to straighten it after though, straighten the audio. But try and get as low as possible until your computer freaks out. That's the best way to practice it. Do a few practices first. Just be aware that the more tracks that you put into your Pro Tools session, excuse me, the more tracks you put into your Pro Tools session, the higher you're going to have to increase that sample as plugins and things take up the CPU power. A lot of people then would click this, ignore errors during playback. I tend not to do that, definitely not whenever I'm recording, because then you have artifacts and clicks and pops that appear in the audio in the track. When you're mixing, it's probably okay to do that a bit. When you're mixing, you can go all the way up to 1024 samples and just mix on that, because you're not putting anything in and latency doesn't matter as much there. So it does in the plugins a wee bit, but we can press OK. So that's how we set up our interface, select it, and then look at the sample rate that we're going to record at. So then the next thing we're going to do is just show you how to set up a track, and then we'll call it a day, something nice and simple. So once you've got that, you press Shift Command and N, or Control Shift and N, I think, on a PC. And you can then input a track. So there's a mono, an audio, mono track, mono audio track. What am I talking about? So there's a mono audio track, and that basically means that you're going to create a track with one sound source, mono, or you can create a track with stereo. The difference between them is, if you think of a microphone, this microphone, for example, is a mono microphone. It has one capsule on the top, one that takes sound in, and then translates that into a digital format. Then there is stereo. There are stereo microphones, or if you're going to record into, say, a keyboard, or record from a keyboard out, you have a left and a right channel that you might want to record into, and you might want a stereo input for that. But for mostly any microphone or guitar that you're recording with, it's going to be mono. If you press create, we now have one track. Okay. Now I did something terrible there that I need to delete and do that again, and I'll show you what it is. So Shift Command and N. I have mono audio track, and name it. So vocal 1, or you might want to call it main vocal, or Vox for short. Okay. So what that means is, if ever you lose some of the audio out of your session, if it's named audio, and every piece of audio in your session is named audio, and every piece of audio, every channel is named audio in all of your sessions on your computer, you'll never be able to find the audio again. You'll never be able to find the track that you're looking for to fit it back in. And sometimes things do just get disjointed, and you're finding it hard to find. So make sure you name it. It'll make it much easier to find. So we have a track there. If you press Command and equals, that goes over to your mix window. Okay, and now that channel has shown up in our mix window. In the mix window, there's an I and an O. Okay, that's the input of your interface. So my interface has 16 channels, but I think 16 channels. So in channel 1, excuse me, I have an input of a microphone I might plug in, or a guitar. My outputs are my 1 and 2, and that's where my speakers are. So that's going to come through my headphones, and it's also come through my monitors. This is your level meter, okay, for when you're mixing after. Panning. Excuse me. Panning left and right. Your I is for monitoring, so hearing yourself back when you're recording. The track record enable is for record enabling. If you want to record anything, you need to record enable and then press record. There's a solo button and a mute button. Above those, okay, is inserts and sends. The inserts are where you put plugins like EQs and reverbs and compression and things like that, and we'll look at that at another point. And then the sends are a place to send the audio to, and we'll talk about that when we're looking at sends. Okay, so to just start, or just to get started, that should be enough to get you set up and ready to go. We're not going to go, these will be a series of small, quick videos just so you can get yourself set up, and then we'll go through and look at each section again. So this is just a wee tester to see if it's something that anyone would be interested in, and let me know. Cheers.